Usurpers were quite common in human history. A person who isn't heir to the throne or has no right to the throne, seizing it for themselves and declaring themselves king. And realistically, if you're a successful enough usurper, you have a long reign and your heir gets on the throne after you, then everyone forgets that you were an usurper. Middle-earth has had a couple of usurpers during its long history, and while none were successful in the long term, they at least left behind important legacies. All except one. In this video, we talk about Tar-Anducal, the forgotten usurper king of Numenor. If you know your lore, you would already know about Numenor's most famous usurper king, Ar-Pharazôn. Ar-Pharazôn was not heir to the scepter of Numenor, he was in fact the nephew of Tar-Palantir, the son of his younger brother Gamilcad. Upon the death of Tar-Palantir in 3255, Ar-Pharazôn made a successful play for the scepter. He forcibly married the daughter and heir of Tar-Palantir, Tar-Miriel, his cousin, and through her he claimed the scepter of Numenor. While this was against the laws of Numenor, Ar-Pharazôn had a strong advantage. Namely, he was the popular leader of the King's Men faction, which most Numenorians supported. So when Ar-Pharazôn took control, even if most of the Numenorians recognized what he was doing as illegal, they were willing to turn a blind eye. In the long term, Ar-Pharazôn's reign was fairly catastrophic for Numenor because it resulted in the complete destruction of the Highland. But as far as being a usurper goes, Ar-Pharazôn was actually successful because he was reasonably competent, he avoided being overthrown, he captured Sauron, and Numenor became so powerful that it effectively controlled most of the world. His impact was far-reaching, and even though it was mostly negative, even the faithful Numenorians recognized some of his achievements. When Gondor captured Umbar, they erected a pillar at the site where Sauron surrendered to Ar-Pharazôn, and it was so insulting to Sauron that when he achieved control of Umbar once again in the late Third Age, he had it torn down. But here's an interesting fact. Ar-Pharazôn's usurpation of the scepter of Numenor was not without precedence, because someone had done it before. This occurred 700 years earlier, during the reign of Tar-Vanameldë, the third of Numenor's queens. By this point, the shadow had well and truly fallen upon Numenor. Tar-Vanameldë's great-grandfather, Tar-Kirirtan, was the first Numenorian king to start oppressing the men of Middle-earth. His son, Tar-Atanamir, was the first king to openly speak against the ban of the Valar. His son, Tar-Ancalimon, oversaw the split in Numenorian society between the king's men and the faithful. His son, Tar-Telemite, was obsessed with silver and mithril, and finally, we reach Tar-Vanameldë. While Tar-Vanameldë doesn't seem to have been cruel or greedy like her immediate forebearers, she did represent another aspect of Numenor's downfall: decadence. She was said to have not cared for the day-to-day ruling of Numenor, and instead preferred to indulge herself in activities such as music and dance. Because of this, the true power in Numenor was held by her husband, Herucalmo, who was also of the line of Elros, being descended from a younger child of Tar-Atanamir, making him and Tar-Vanameldë distant cousins. Probably distant enough to not be weird, unlike Ar-Pharazôn and Tar-Miriel. Tar-Vanameldë was slightly older than Herucalmo, 9 years to be precise, and this is important because Tar-Vanameldë was the first ruler of Numenor to truly be affected by a consequence of the shadow, a dwindling lifespan. It technically started with her father, Tar-Telemite, but he still lived to be 390, still within the range of a regular lifespan of someone who was part of the line of Elros. But Tar-Vanameldë only lived to be 360, ruling for 111 years. So when she died, Herucalmo was still alive, and seemingly not senile either, because upon his wife's death he refused to relinquish the scepter to his son, Tar-Alcarin. Instead, Herucalmo actually declared himself king, taking the regnal name of Tar-Anducal, which may have meant something like Light of the West. We don't know why Herucalmo did this. Perhaps he thought getting his own reign was his just reward for acting as Numenor's regent for so many years. Perhaps he did not believe his son to be worthy. Unfortunately, we know pretty much nothing about Tar-Alcarin, so we can't make that judgment. Whatever the reason, Herucalmo seems to have gotten away with it. As regent, he was probably able to stack the council and other powerful positions with his own supporters, so that when Tar-Vanameldë died, there was no meaningful opposition against his claim. Tar-Alcarin might have been left without any support, meaning that the only way he could claim the throne would be plunging Numenor into civil war. And perhaps this wouldn't have even worked. Maybe Herucalmo was popular. After all, he had been the de facto ruler for over 100 years, and was still of the line of Elros, if not the direct one. Regardless of the situation and the circumstances, Herucalmo had one major problem running against him: time. He was already 351 when he took the scepter, and given his wife's death at 361, he knew that he might have no longer than a decade. Fortunately for him, he did last a little longer than Tar-Vanameldë, and he managed to reach 371, dying in the year 2657, his rule having lasted for 20 years. At last, the throne passed to Tar-Alcarin. But these 20 years did make a difference, because the decrease in lifespan only accelerated with each passing ruler. Tar-Alcarin would live to 331, a full 40 years less than his usurper father. His true rule would last only 80 years. Now, Herucalmo's usurpation didn't really do any damage at the time. The only consequence for him is that after his death, his name was struck from the annals of Numenor's rulers, meaning that he wasn't accounted as Numenor's 17th ruler. This likely means that Tar-Alcarin wasn't too happy about his father's actions. However, Herucalmo's usurpation was just another troubling sign of Numenor's descent into the shadow. In the past, the rulers of Numenor abdicated anywhere between a few years to a few decades before they died, not wishing to carry the scepter into true old age. From Tar-Atanamir onwards, the Numenorian rulers clung onto the scepter and their lives up until the point they died, weak and senile. And now a father was denying the scepter from his son, just to squeeze out a few extra years of rule in his own name. But apart from being slashed from the records, why is Herucalmo, Tar-Anducal, forgotten? Well, that's because he makes no appearances in the appendices of the Lord of the Rings. In the list of Numenorian rulers, his name isn't listed, and there's nothing about Tar-Alcarin that suggests his reign was usurped. This isn't an editorial error either. In earlier editions, Tar-Ardamin, the grandson of Tar-Alcarin, also doesn't appear in the appendices, but this was later corrected. Instead, you can only find information about Herucalmo in the Unfinished Tales, in the Line of Elros section. But even in this section, he does not get his own line, as instead found under Tar-Vanameldë. For a while, Herucalmo's actions seem to have been an embarrassing moment in the history for the Numenorians. None of Tar-Alcarin's immediate successors ran into problems with succession, and even in the time of Ar-Gimilzor, they were respected. For context, Ar-Gimilzor was an awful man who accidentally got himself into a predicament where his eldest son, Inzilladun, the future Tar-Palantir, was of the faithful, whereas his younger son, Gimilcad, was of the King's Men. We're told Ar-Gimilzor would have designated Gimilcad his heir, but could not change the laws of Numenor and ultimately did not break them. This, of course, changed with Ar-Pharazôn, who may have used Herucalmo as something of a precedent. Like Herucalmo, he was competent and had popular support. Like Herucalmo, he was descended from the line of Elros and then married into the main line. The main difference is that Ar-Pharazôn forcibly married Tamiriel, was a first cousin rather than a distant one, and cast her aside and usurped the throne immediately, ruling only under his name. In this way, he was worse than Herucalmo, but that makes sense because Numenor was a worse place at this time, and while Herucalmo would end up traditionally forgotten, Ar-Pharazôn would be remembered in name, but physically, he ended up imprisoned in the Caves of the Forgotten, after his catastrophic invasion of Valinor. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. I feel like the politics of Numenor, especially in the years following Tar-Kiriatan, must have been fairly wild. You would have a kingdom transforming into a colonial empire. You'd have power-hungry nobles, governors, admirals, and generals, and then once you add the King's Men and the faithful split into the equation, well, it just gets worse. Tar-Palantir's reign must have been rather stressful. Cheers, farewell, and remember, Herucalmo was the original boomer.